do you remember why you defaulted to self-harm specifically? Tonight, sitting across from me, I got Scott Mackey, who is a novelist and emotional mastery facilitator here in Austin, Texas.
I wasn't actually trying to kill myself, for instance.
Right.
It was really some combination of, had a lot of doubts, and part of it is just, driven by being so unhappy. Is that there's a million ways to interpret that happening, from an act of God to happenstance to, and I just see the church as being so profoundly broken. I was pissed off. I was fed up with it. Like, I had a single goal in life. I'm not going to hell, but I can go do whatever I want. And I just experienced that as freedom for the longest time. I walked away from Jesus and something had to replace that. And there was Barack Obama. I wasn't planning to get into such like an emotional contemplative space myself tonight, but yeah, it just about makes me cry, that story. People, when you are being left out of something or when you are not engaged, you are watching the people who are leaving you out play acting what they're doing in real time somewhere on your Instagram or your TikTok feed, which also means that the answer to every single one of those quote unquote crises is
everyone. Welcome to another episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back. Tonight, sitting across from me, I got Scott Mackey, who is a novelist and emotional mastery facilitator here in Austin, Texas. If you like this episode, please support Scott by purchasing this book right here, Love is Not the Answer, on Amazon. And where do you want people to buy it from?
Honestly, Amazon is the best.
Okay, get it from Amazon.
It trains the algorithms.
Perfect. So go get it on Amazon. I'm about halfway through it. I definitely will finish reading it. It's going to be super fun. Tonight, if you're new to the show, we talk about business, fitness, and culture. Those are our three main topics. And tonight, we're going to be going on a journey as someone who was raised in a religious home, ended up working in politics for a little bit, founded his own business, somehow went from being in DC to now being in Austin, Texas as an author. I learned 10 minutes ago that you also did pottery making for a time or currently. You have been all over the world. You've been to Colorado, Dublin, Arkansas, New York, Mexico, New Orleans, Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Utah, Wyoming. And those were only the ones that showed up on your social media pages. So I'm sure there could be even more in there.
You missed the fun ones, the Afghanistans and Pakistans of the world. But
my apologies.
I don't know. It's all right.
I blame you, LinkedIn, not being thorough enough.
I'm bad at Instagram. I'm getting a lot of feedback about that right now in life, so it's all good.
There may have been a phase where you didn't post for like a year. I noticed it was like there was one in like August of 2021, and then the next one was like July of 2023. We took a little break. Maybe that was good for him.
Historically posted in threes, as in 3 posts over 6 months, and then I can take a year off.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I'm excited and really curious to see where this conversation goes. Welcome to your episode of David's Saturday Night
Thank you, my friend. David, I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited
We're going to have a great time.
So before we dive too deep into it, I was wondering if you talk to the audience a little bit and tell them, based off of what you know we're going to be talking about, why should they stick around for this episode?
If anything along the lines of psychedelic Jesuses, political transformation, reformation, recreation, just thinking about corrupt systems, good people, and what is possible. Some of the other things we went over. Yeah, man, art is cool. Writing is art. Life, in fact, should be art. And so everything we're going to be talking about is art also. And I don't know if art is exciting to your readers, but art's a beautiful thing.
Did you say to my readers?
I did. I meant listeners. I'm a writer,
you're
man.
a writer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. It took me.
The brain doesn't always work.
We are halfway through the week, and yeah. Are you happy?
Dude, I'm super happy. I'm in a really beautiful phase of life right now. I recently got married. The book is out. I'm doing the work of the book, which has me feeling very, very aligned. That kind of like special place of flow you get to when you're clear on purpose, you're clear on desire, and your energy is aligned, moving and going in a focused direction. Feels good.
So let me ask you this. If happiness was a recipe, what is missing from your list of ingredients that would make you perfectly happy?
this could be a long conversation. But I'll tell you right now, nothing.
That's awesome. You're the first person to answer it like that.
And I'll tell you why. It's like in the version of the world I most desire to live in, externally, does not exist yet. I'm extremely clear on that. But like we all have this capability of we can imagine the external version of the world we want to live in, right? So like what is this perfect place we're trying to get to? And like anything you can imagine, you can actually create the feelings around. And so like one exercise I do really routinely is I envision where it is I'm going in life, what I'm creating. I sit in the feeling of being there. So I have that feeling alive in me. And I work very hard, and I'm not always successful at this, but I work very hard then to like generate and then live from this feeling of saying, I've gotten everything I want out of life. I've accomplished everything I desire to accomplish. I have gone and done everything that I want to do. And you learn eventually that like you can create that feeling within you, and then you just like live like that. So it doesn't mean that like every ingredient in life I actually want to have, I have, but I have the capability of creating that feeling and then living with that every day. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's something anybody can do. Takes a lot of work. And then there are just bad months. And that happens also.
That does.
Yeah.
That does happen. Call me when you're having a bad month and let me know what's missing from the ingredient list.
Well, I'll tell you, I've lost faith and I've lost my ability to like surrender to the process. And then I don't see like the outcomes I desire coming, or I'm somehow feeling less than myself. And you just start clenching.
Yeah.
And it like becomes a lot of work.
I have felt if I was to get, stumbling over my words here, if there was a point where I was getting closer to like a heaven on earth type of situation, it's been since I started the show.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I feel like my values and who I am are in alignment with the actions that I'm doing on a daily basis.
Fuck yeah.
And so I would say I'm in a similar boat where could I sit here and come up with a list of reasons of why I'm not in a perfectly blissful state? Sure. I could complain about whatever. But I agree too, man. Ever since launching the show, getting about 20 to 30 episodes in and figuring out where I sort of want to take this thing, life has felt like it's going in the right direction. And it's a good feeling.
Yeah. And to be clear, I have not accomplished almost any of the things I think I am on this earth to do in the long run, but I'm in the process I'm supposed to be in.
Yeah.
And that is beautiful. Also, like, look at the wall behind you. You just have all these pictures up here of past podcast episodes.
Yeah.
Like, that's like you gaining value from life and you giving value, like you serving.
Yeah, it's a cool wall.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I like looking at it.
Like a little envy looking at that wall. I'm like, oh, yeah, he's doing it.
Maybe you could start taking pictures of when you meet a reader. When you...
And then I post them on Instagram, and then I don't go a year without posting.
No, then you print them.
Oh, yeah.
I'll send you a link. It's like 60 cents a photo.
Okay.
It's almost brainless work.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why I don't do it more.
Well, at a minimum, we're going to get a selfie before we walk out of here.
Yes, you will.
Amen.
Yes, we will.
All right.
Do you remember getting punched around July 10th of 2014?
Oh, my gosh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What's going on there?
Dude.
You weren't expecting that question, were you?
No, this is great. All right, so here's the story. I lived in D.C. still, and I'm out at dinner with several like older friends, probably in their 50s or 60s, and they're all like USAID people. I used to work in international development, foreign policy. We have a nice dinner, right? Like it was a couple like older men. I think their wives were out of town, so they were taking I was 28 at the time or something, and so they were taking like the kid out for dinner. Go to a nice restaurant, drink a few bottles of wine. So finished dinner. I'm in a great mood, had a fun night. I'm like walking home down U Street, which is one of the main kind of like entertainment districts in DC. I'm fairly drunk, feeling good. And I'm like, man, I want a cigarette. And standing outside of this bar, 3 pretty attractive, seemingly very nice women. They were very nice women, and they were smoking. And so, I'm walking by and I stop and I was like, hey, can I bum a cigarette off of y'all? They're like, sure, no problem. So they give me a cigarette and then they're like, hey, by the way, there's this guy who's been harassing us. Will you stay here and smoke it with us? So I just skip over there's this guy who's been harassing us part. And I just hear 3 pretty women say, would you like to smoke this cigarette with us? And I'm like, oh, yes. I would love to smoke this cigarette with you. So fast forward 5 minutes, 3 minutes maybe, and they're like, oh, that's the guy. And there's this like bald, muscular dude in an oversized Boston Red Sox jersey rambling back down the street who's clearly just very intoxicated. And they're like, that's the guy. And they're like, "Da, da, da." And I look at him, I'm like, not worried, whatever. So like fast forward a second, like he comes up to me and he taps me on the back and he's, I was like, I don't remember what he said exactly, but I just blew him off. I was like, dude, like they don't owe you anything. I don't owe you anything. Like, get out of here. So like I turn back around and just next thing I feel is this like, and he sucker punched me. Like on U Street, people everywhere. This guy had just unloaded, which was that enormous split in my lip you saw right there.
Yeah.
So like long story short, like I'm not a fighter, but I am from Texas. So there's a certain amount of pride built in, so, like in fights in high school or similar. But so I like throw my backpack down and I turn around and he's like swinging at me again and I duck it. Anyways, I had this moment. I was like, do I hit him back? It's like, this is Washington, D.C. The cops actually take fighting seriously. Like, if I hit this guy, I might end up with like legal issues. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm like, I'm not gonna hit him. So like instead, I ducked the punch and I like threw my arm around his neck like that, and, like body slammed him over my knee, and then I jumped on him. Hey, dog. I just jumped on him and pinned him, and I was so mad. I was just like screaming at him. I'm sure like cursing at him, and I just pinned him until the cops came at that point, and that's the story. Yeah, it's just a sucker punch situation.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad I asked you that.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah, good times.
Women, cigarettes, sucker punches, great story.
That's a good night.
Yeah,
you
no
hit,
doubt.
You hit all of the things needed. There's a good recipe right there.
There is a good recipe.
Yeah, you had a drink. The older guys took the younger guy out to dinner, so you got a good, delicious meal as well.
Delicious meal.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
You've traveled a lot.
I've been very lucky.
Why?
And have chosen. Why?
Yeah, why do you travel so much?
Definitely been traveling less as I've gotten older. But, it's like my parents were missionaries. They had traveled all over the world, and then I grew up in rural East Texas, and I was always aware that I lived in a very small version of what I knew was a much larger world. I was not particularly happy growing up, and so I fantasized about and I idealized like a future version of myself where I was going to get to go out and go everywhere. And so that was like, just as a kid, like I knew that was going to be my future and I was going to do that. And so in the end, it's, like I figured out how to build life for a long time around getting to do those things, and like had jobs, like worked in foreign policy, which allowed me to travel and be in interesting places, i.e. war zones or insecure environments, have prioritized building time off in between really every job that I've had where I could take 2 or 6 months and go travel and get to go different places. And, partially I'm just doing that for fun. Partially there's so much you can learn about the world. And when you show up somewhere and you don't have right or wrong in your mind, you just have, how do I come to understand why people are living as they live or believe as they believe? And you can like connect with humans. You like look around like the diversity on Earth and it's not threatening. It's just really exciting and inspiring. And when you kind of get into that, that's addictive too.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, culture, I use that as a term to be able to invite just about anyone on the podcast.
Yeah.
But in terms of culture in like a literal sense, in all the places you traveled, whether it was here in the U.S. or somewhere else on the globe, was there any particular city, region, place where you visited where something about their culture just seemed on point? Where was it, and what was it that you identified that you sort of gravitated towards?
Dude, that's a beautiful question. So I have so many potential answers running through my mind right now. So I'll say this. I avoided going to Europe for the longest time because it seemed like bad value and everybody liked Europe and I was aloof and kind of an asshole. And I was like, I don't need to go to Europe. I'm going to go to like Central Africa, whatever. But finally, this was probably like 2015 now, ended up in Italy for a couple months. And I just loved Italy. And what I loved about Italy was this, like, even in big cities, like things felt small. Like everybody was out drinking coffee together in the morning. There was so much connection, so much conversation going on. Even as an annoying dude who just looked like a tourist there, like would talk to people often when, was like getting espresso in the morning. We went out and actually shopped for our food in little markets every single day. And then like people get flavor, and it's a country where aesthetics are valued. Like you don't necessarily just build to build, you build with an eye towards art. You build with an eye towards like this thing that I'm building is going to be here for some version of a long time or forever, at least as it exists in my life. Like it should be beautiful as well. And yeah, like really got turned on by that. It felt good to be around where things are both local and connected, but are also beautiful.
I like that.
Yeah.
I heard someone, I love what you said about everyone having coffee together in the morning. A couple of my friends were out here from New York 3 months ago, and they stayed at my place one night while they were visiting Austin. And in the morning when we woke up, it was really nice out, so we all filled up our coffee cups, went out onto the porch, and sat out there for like 2.5 hours and just talked and drank our coffee. It's like the perfect way to start the day. It was wonderful.
It's such a luxury and so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I say luxury, but it doesn't have to be a luxury, actually. It's one of the cheapest things we can do to just bring excellence into the start of a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if we want to bring excellence into the end of the day, I do have decaf here. Or caffeinated, but you'd be alone on that one.
Put
I'd
a
be
pin
up
in it.
all night.
Well, I am the guy that can drink, I will drink coffee after dinner and be fine normally. I think I just zapped my system so much in my 20s. I'm still okay. But I do have a question for you. Going back, why did you think I got punched? Like, what's the story that...
I had no idea.
All right. I'd forgotten about that.
That's funny. I didn't even think about like I haven't. So when I was going through your Instagram, when I go through anyone's Instagram, I go to the very bottom, and anytime I see a post I think I might want to ask them about, I just take a screenshot of it, and then I just keep on scrolling. So I don't even really have. I just know like he got punched. That's a good icebreaker. Hopefully, it could be terrible. It could bring back this nightmarish of a story that you've been working on with a therapist for the last decade.
God, that was a funny night.
Yeah, no assumptions on my end.
All right, good stuff.
Speaking of, you put up another picture. You remember this one?
Yeah.
And see the caption at the bottom?
Love, hate kind of town.
So for the audience who's just listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, this will be up on the YouTube version. But it's a picture of New York. It's very foggy. It looks sort of peaceful, to be honest. It's from October of 2017. Why is New York a love-hate kind of town from your perspective?
So much culture, so many fascinating people, so much to do. You can't see the sky. You have to go underground like every single day. It feels so constraining and constricted. So New York's always been a 2 or 3 day at a time city for me. Like I get there, I get so energized, and then 2 days in, I walk outside and I can't see the sky, or I have to go underground into this tunnel, and like Hunter S. Thompson style, like the fear starts to take me over, and it's like, I gotta go. Yeah. It's time.
I gotta go. I'm out.
Yeah.
Have you, by chance, been to Sacramento, California?
Several times.
Okay. So my sister, my oldest sister, Melissa, shout out Melissa, she has basically lived in Sacramento her whole life. She did have a stint where she went to Boston for a couple years. She came back home. Melissa just moved to Manhattan. So if you had to imagine knowing what you know about Sacramento and knowing what you know about New York, for someone who's in their first 6 months in the city, what kind of... I mean, I guess she's going through the cultural shock of everything you just mentioned, that there is no underground in Sacramento, that you can see the sky in Sacramento. Yeah. It's not super crowded. Like, it's big, but it's not Manhattan big.
There's space.
Yeah.
Tahoe's right there. Like, how do I feel like her experience is going?
Well, I guess I sort of answered the question I asked you for you. But yeah, what do you think, like...
Well, she's either having the time of her life, because she's like, fucking arrived. Yeah. Or she is like spending way more time than she planned in a fetal position, like wondering how she ended up living in this urban hellscape. It's one of the two.
Yeah.
Maybe she's just fine, but that's less interesting.
I might have to send her a text after this and just be like, so Do you love life, hate it, or did you get lucky enough to land somewhere in the middle?
Yeah.
Or hopefully she's loving it. That's
Hopefully
the hope,
she's
is
loving
that
it.
she's just like, I'm out of Sacramento. I'm in a real city.
Yeah. And a lot of people do love it. Like really love New York, and it works for them, and I respect that.
Yeah.
But got a little bit too much nature boy in me.
I haven't been to New York, but someone just moved into this, like across the street from me.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, my God, it's nice to live next to a forest. Like, thank God I'm here.
Yeah.
I think she said she stayed there 9 years before she made it to Austin. So,
That's a long time.
yeah. All right, I got 2 more pictures for
All
you.
right.
So these 2 will sort of lead into
Beautiful.
the story that is Scott. You remember this one?
Oh yeah.
So when you look at those 2 boys, 2
Mm-hmm.
men, outside of the physical attributes changing, what's the difference? What age are you in those pictures, and what's the biggest difference between those 2 versions of you?
All right, so the picture where I'm like a cheesing surfer looking dude, I think I'm 20, and that's right before I went to South Africa for a summer to do a research project when I was in college. And so I got that passport right before I left on that trip. And then then that passport book was filled, and so I was on short notice leaving for Afghanistan on a work trip for a month, and I had to like turn it around real fast. And so it's like the opportunity came up in the morning. I was like working with one of those expedited passport agencies. Like by that afternoon, I was just having to get a picture taken where I ended up looking, I guess, as your listeners can see, like the world's biggest stiff, basically. But yeah, it was still good. Like,
Yeah.
but it's tragic. Like the first passport, the filled one where I looked like just a happy, goofy 20-year-old kid. Like, yeah, house got broken into and they took that passport. And so
Oh.
somewhere out there in a box in a thrift shop, my OG passport is waiting to be returned to me.
It's so weird what people take, because you can't do anything with the passport, can you?
Do it.
I mean, unless you look just like the person in it and you need to do some like secret international travel to get away from some trouble you caused.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, it was expired by then. I think there's a class of people that know what to do with the stolen passport and can find some value in it. I am not in that class of people.
I'm not in that class of people either.
Good for us.
Where'd you grow up,
East Texas,
specifically?
like a town called Van. It's about 2,000 folks, halfway between Dallas and Shreveport, near Tyler.
2,000 folks.
2,000 folks.
Just booming town.
Well, it's up to 2,500 now, so it is growing.
What is that? A 25 or?
I think it's a 25% increase,
yeah.
and maybe it's a. I honestly get confused on how you talk about percentage increases. Like, do you talk about percentage from where you start or percentage where you end up?
Or would
I'm
it
not
be
sure.
125% increase. No,
Definitely
that means it would
not
have to
that
be
one.
more than double.
Yeah.
Yeah, 25%. We are not.
We're done with math.
We are not population
All right,
experts.
Yeah.
Is this where you grew up?
That is.
Were you guys on like a ranch, or you called it an acre in the picture?
It's an acre. So we lived just outside of Van. From when I was probably, I think we moved there when I was 6 or 7. But yeah, it's an acre, like right off of FM 16, Farm to Market 16. It's the name of the road. And on 3 sides of us, it's just big cow pasture. And then our little acre was carved out at some point before we bought it, and that was our acre, kind of our homestead. My dad gardened there. My mom built out the dell, which is what that picture was of, but she drinks tea and prays there every morning, sort of thing.
To this day?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
To this day. She loves it.
You think though your parents will live there till they pass?
I'm basically certain of it now.
Yeah.
My dad will. My mom, well, you never know with these things. The odds
Right.
are good, not being morose at all, but my dad will go first, and I think at that point, my mom will probably move to Waco. But I've got a brother and his family there. But my dad is not leaving that acre. He's put 30 years into the dirt in that garden, and he will not leave that. Nothing could get him to go. He's doing the dirt till he dies.
He's doing the dirt.
Oh, yeah.
Doing the dirt till death. There's a T-shirt.
There's a T-shirt, and there's something beautiful about it. It's frustrating in some ways because, he could be seeing his grandkids more. But on the other hand, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, he's put so much time, literal, like, blood, sweat, tears into this dirt. he loves growing things and tending it. He's not going.
Yeah. I just found out that peas are a good thing to plant into dirt to keep it healthy during the summer months.
Interesting.
From a friend of mine who worked at ranch for a couple years. Because to give you some context, I went over to his house and he's growing just like mass amounts of peas. And I asked him, are you just like eating peas every night? Are you making pea soup and pea smoothies? And like, what the fuck are you doing with all these peas? And he's like, no, I mean, yes, we do eat them, but it's also just to keep the ground healthy during the summer months when it's scorching hot out. So then we can actually grow stuff we want in the fall, winter, and spring. And I was like, the more you know. So
Cover
there's
crop.
a tip for the audience. Plant peas during the summertime.
Grow peas, shade soil.
Yeah. Do you know if this is true or not?
I have a lot of secondhand gardening knowledge and very little firsthand gardening knowledge. And peas as a hot weather cover crop are not part of any of my knowledge or any of my imagined knowledge.
There's your
I
knowledge.
think peas
There's
are an
more
early
knowledge
spring
for you.
crop because they can't grow when it's hot. So this is a
Oh.
different pea use based
So
on
someone
what
is
I'm aware of.
someone is wrong.
It's probably me, almost certainly.
So growing up in East Texas, what do you remember between the ages of like 0 and 13? What was that experience like to the best of your memory?
Oh man. So we moved to East Texas when I was 4. We'd mostly been in Los Angeles before that. You know what? Like I was just unhappy as a kid.
Really?
Yeah. I was in counseling therapy as a 7-year-old for several years. I went through a stage of like being self-harming around that age. I couldn't sleep at night for years because I'd have scary feelings whenever I closed my eyes. It was just a very, very unhappy childhood. And, there's no like blame to point one way or the other. My parents had their flaws, like all of our parents have their flaws, but it's a situation where some combination of how I was naturally wired, how our family was wired, how our parents' expectations worked out. I was just a particularly poor fit for that mix, and did not have a good run of it.
Yeah.
But it really, and there's a lot more. I played a lot of baseball. I loved baseball. Baseball is a thing I was good at, and so I found a lot of joy there. I got really, really good grades in school, which mostly made me happy, though. The threat of not getting good grades in school was crippling. Like, I remember feeling that, got spankings if we got a B grade sort of thing. Anyway, my wife comments a lot. She was just like, you had such a sad childhood. And I don't often remember it like that, but I don't think about childhood a lot. Like, it's not a happy thing I reminisce on generally.
Yeah. I had a teen counselor on the show a couple months ago, and she was telling me that one of the more common issues amongst her clients is the self-harm. And that one thing that's really interesting about that is that they all think that they're unique, that they're the only one doing it. And she's like, well, 95% of my client base is. And I do think that there's almost a comfort in that, in people knowing that they're not alone. Do you remember why you defaulted to self-harm specifically at that time?
And I was really little when I was doing that.
Because you said 7,
I was
right?
like 7 or 8. Like, I have these, what I really have is largely these memories of my parents interjecting to, like, stop me from doing or, like, talking to me about this thing I had been threatening to do and why it would really not serve me to do this thing, or like sticking my finger in a socket really didn't make sense, sort of thing.
Right.
So I experienced that more as like mostly a fact I remember. It's definitely something I'm like working with myself at different times. I've been able to like go back and embody that feeling of being a little kid and like just being that upset.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, I wasn't actually trying to kill myself, for instance.
Right.
It was really some combination of seeking attention and like a morbid curiosity of doing something you're really not supposed to do, but like somehow or like driven towards, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned your parents were missionaries.
Parents were missionaries.
What religion or denomination did you guys practice growing up?
They were in an organization called Mercy Ships,
Okay.
Non-denominational. Just like very service oriented. It's literally hospital ships to serve the nations.
Oh yeah.
It's a
okay,
well-known
okay.
work.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, it's like it's huge now.
Yeah.
And like they do awesome work. And my parents were OG mercy shippers, like living on the beach in Greece way back in the day when they had got their first ship, which was a rusted out, broken down ferry they were starting to refurbish by hand.
Right.
So yeah, like my parents go way back with mercy ships. And you know how we ended up in East Texas was mercy ships got land to be their base. It was very hard to run an organization from sea, especially like, you know, pre-easy satellite access days. And so I was, and this was part of my story and the awkwardness of growing up where I grew up, but we were part of this horde of mostly but not exclusively European missionaries who like plopped down in an oil and ranching community and just went on our weird way. So yeah, it was like, it's not a natural fit in that world either.
Yeah.
You know, it's like East Texas, like it's a cultural Christianity, the world of, you know, Southern Baptist and Bible churches. And my parents and this organization were, you know, like very theologically conservative on the one hand, certainly very politically conservative as well, which was, you know, like fairly aligned with where we grew up at. But they were also, they didn't use this word, but, you know, like social justice obsessed. Like they had committed their life to service. The idea that, you know, to whom much is given, much is required was their ethos. Like they were driven to serve. They looked at Christ and they saw a man who committed his life at all times, no matter the opposition, to serving the least of these. And they're just like, we're going to go do that with our life, no matter how extreme it may look. You know, and that was definitely a different ethos than what most of kind of the faith carried in East Texas as a whole. So yeah, there's like a lot of similarity, but there are different streams of faith that like ran through me in that sense.
Did you guys go to church on Sundays?
Every week.
Every week. Do you remember? For me, it was always. I don't think I started to really think about what we were actually doing until I was like 16 to 20, somewhere in there. Before that, it was just like a thing we did on Sunday. You know, you
Yeah.
and I'm not saying we didn't practice throughout the rest of the week. My family, my parents raised us on the pretty straight and narrow in terms of like, we don't drink, we don't curse, we try our best to not
Amen,
be
brother.
jealous, to be patient,
Yeah.
practice the fruits of the
Really
Spirit.
good values
But
mostly.
really, for the most part, it was objectively not bad things, you
Yeah.
know? But for you, do you remember, you know, even past 13, I know I put like an age range earlier, but do you remember if there was ever a point where you started to maybe question it isn't the right word, but it became something, it became more than just this thing we do on Sundays? Like what actually is this thing we're reading, praying to, you know what, does this question make any sense?
Oh, I'm just trying to decide, is this a 5-minute answer or like a 55-minute answer? But, so, you know, it's like, we were never casual Christians. Like, we believed.
You were on mercy ships.
Prayed. Like, there was a spirituality, like a real living spirituality built into, you know, like the world of belief and faith, which like there's feeling attached to. And so, you know, like I was deeply embedded in that. And part of my family's identity was just being better Christians than everybody else because we lived on less money and we were more generous and we served more clearly and therefore were more Christ-like, which is not an attractive set of qualities, but was definitely part at least of the kind of like core coding that me and my brothers took on as we experienced growing up in our family. All to say is like had a lot of doubts, and part of it is just, you know, driven by being so unhappy, because that, you know, eventually really starts to make you wonder and question things in a lot of different ways. But I had, like, in either freshman or sophomore year of high school, I hit my first kind of breaking point, and I was extremely unhappy at that point in time. I didn't feel like I had many or any good friends. I, you know, felt like just socially awkward, didn't fit in. The version of faith that I was read about and I was promised, like, none of those miracles were happening in my life, you know?
Yeah.
And so I had what felt to me like my first real intense time of prayer. Also realize I'm telling the story as someone who, like, walked away from the faith eventually, and it's part of this conversation, a different part of it. But like I prayed really intensely. I was like, God, if you were real, like I need like friends and I need a sign of some sort, or like I think I'm done. And this is like over a weekend, and I'm really unhappy. Like I'm desperate. Like, this is me being like, I will like, hell is real. Like I will maybe walk away from salvation. Like, it's like, it's a fear-driven thing that like held one in as well. But this was my prayer. Like I need friends. I need connections. Show me you are real. And that Sunday afternoon, this guy I knew in town just like came by the family acre. We looked at a picture of it and like drove up and asked my parents where I was at and came and found me and was like, we just got back from, they were like at a camp of some sort. And he's like, we're starting a Bible study. Do you want to be part of it? And I was like, yeah. But like that was a profound moment for me. And that carried me for a very long time. Just this like, there's a million ways to interpret that happening, from an act of God to happenstance to new agey manifestation talk where all energy is everything and prayer is manifestation. And we can talk about a million different ways of how the laws of attraction work within the world, et cetera, et cetera. But like, that was a real experience for me. And so that was the time where I was like, all right, I'm in. And I like really believed. And, we can fast forward a number of years now to where I'm in college. Like, I really believe. I love Jesus. I spend a lot of time in the Gospels. And I just see the church as being so profoundly broken. Like, Jesus is love. Jesus is service. He spent his life casting as wide a net as possible, inviting anybody and everybody in. There was no law with Jesus. There was no judgment with Jesus. There was no shame with Jesus. There was certainly no politics with Jesus. And all that I felt in the church and all I could see in the church was an exclusionary approach to salvation, was shame for acting a certain way, was being belittled for believing in a certain way, was being separated from God or God's love if you did not express belief in God in the correct manner. And I was pissed off. I was fed up with it. Like I had a single goal in life from 18 to 22, and that was to go find truth with a capital T and use that to reform evangelical Christianity. And what really happened to me in that process was I lost my faith. And it was this slow, spiritual, deeply prayerful process that like I very firmly believe now, but like I was separated from like a knowing of God within the context that I knew God, which was just the evangelical church. Because eventually I was going to need to meet God in a different context. But I didn't know that at the time.
Right.
I just knew that I was fed up with the church, and the more that I sought God, the more I started finding God in different places. Like I stopped going to church largely, but I found Christian contemplatives and mystics like the Thomas Mertons or the Khalil Gibrans of the world. And in reading them, discovered they considered mystics and contemplatives from other faith traditions to be their contemporaries and to be their equals. And so I started reading Thich Nhat Hanh, and I met Rumi and Hafiz and, all of these other great teachers and writers from across time, and began to discover and like feel in myself as I studied traditions of like knowing God, not belief, not a religion, but just like knowing God was like, oh, the experience of God is universal. The experience of God is the same. Like since we have been writing things down across time, across history, across culture, those who touch God, like experience God, have really the same experience. They have almost the same takeaways. And then these experiences of God get filtered through culture and society, and they begin to become institutionalized. And as things become institutionalized, power and money get involved, and organizations start to be built, and the people at the head of what is now a religious organization are not responding to the touching and the knowing of God. They're responding to the incentives of one who has power or has money and needs to maintain power and make more money. It's the story of every institution of all time, whether it's God or not. So this is me at like 21. And I eventually, this is this could have been this beautiful inquiry, like start of inquiry for me. I could have committed the rest of my life to exploring this place where it was like, God is real, God is everywhere. But like, what does that actually mean? But instead, what in like my stressed out, traumatized, just learning to not be miserable mind was I got to a place where I was like, so I really know now. I really believe, I feel that I'm not going to go to hell. And I was like, I'm out. And I was like, I'm out. I was like, I'm going to go get drunk. I am going to like, what is this sex everybody is having? Like, I was just like, fuck it. Like I'm not going to hell, then I can go do whatever I want. And I just experienced that as freedom for the longest time. You know, like
Yeah.
I had so much stress and so much pressure, and I had felt such a burden around like literally saving the church or reforming the church. Like I was carrying that as my mission. And then then when I was finally like, oh, I'm not gonna go to hell, I was like, all right, bye. Like I'd spent a like decade just done. Yeah, you know, that's like I worked in politics. I was in DC. I was still mission driven in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I kept the values that I had, you know, been grounded in, both from my parents and from my own like exploration or inquiry or work. But I just like went and found different ways to express them, and you know, just like severed my connection to spirit, for lack of a better word. That was like a 15-minute answer to a short question. May not be what you were looking for, but
I loved it. Well, when you said this could be 5 or 55 minutes, I went, I hope it's the 55-minute answer. Why if you had to guess, and maybe you answered this already, why do you think you gave a damn about like fixing the church? Because some people might just recognize it and be like, whatever, you know, I'm gonna work on myself. Like, is it almost like there's something within, like, just who knows where it came from, but like within you where you're like, no, this has to be fixed. They have to see Jesus as more loving and less rules, and like, yeah, let me just go back to the original simple question. Why do you think you gave such a damn?
Man, like I really had a living, connected, like spiritual, energetic connection with like Jesus. It was, you know, and like the air I breathed growing up, the water I was raised in was Jesus. And it was imperfect in so many ways. But I had like latched onto and felt and built a relationship with, like, you know, like the biblical Jesus. It was like the energy of all of it was so alive in me. Like, are you familiar with the concept of dharma? Not a Christian concept, but dharma is similar to purpose or calling. It's a primarily Hindu, but also Buddhist concept. But dharma is described really beautifully, where dharma is self meeting, or like your dharma is what happens when like self meets the moment. Self being the clearest version of you can get to, and you can know your strengths, your capabilities, your values, your desires, your heart, what turns you on, and the moment, the need of the world around you.
Almost
Dharma
like Ikigai.
I don't know what that is.
Keep going with dharma.
Okay.
Unless
Come
you want
back
me,
to
we can
come back to that
it
word I
maybe.
can't pronounce.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so dharma is just like self meets the moment. It's like whoever you are meets the need of the moment, and that is your dharma. That is your purpose. These should be your priority or priorities for any given amount of time. So I think for me, it was like my dharma at that period of time, and I've since discovered that it hasn't changed in many ways, much to my chagrin. But like me, what I loved, how I'd been raised, how I'd been hardwired, coded, what the spiritual reality of me being me was, meeting the need of an evangelical church that is and was hemorrhaging people that had so warped and bastardized unconditional love in the name of God to serve other purposes. It was like I arrived at this like and this is also like immaturity, but like I was like, this is my cross to bear, this is my burden. And then it turned out it wasn't. And then it may have turned out again that it was in a very different sort of way. But it was just like so alive in me at that point in time.
Yeah.
There's like no choice. You just, when the door is flung open in front of you and there's a pull and a pressure coming from behind, you're just like, okay, I'll go. That was how I experienced that, at least.
You ever heard of Master's Commission?
Yes, but I don't know what it is.
So I was in a similar. Our story has parallels. They're not identical, but there's definitely some parallels. When I graduated high school, instead of going to college, I go to this program called Master's Commission, and it's where you pay a church to intern with them. The intern is paying the church to go work for them for a year, and so everyone has. We had jobs that we did as a team, but everyone sort of has like their own individual role that they play based off of your own skill set. I played the piano, so I was on the worship team and played on Sundays for the main church. Thursday nights for the youth group. We went on tour a few times up and down the West Coast. But that was like how deep into it I was. It was just like same thing. Like it was real. Like heaven is a real place. Hell is going to a real place. I'm praying for all my friends that aren't Christians because I love them and I want them to go to heaven too. And I would invite them to church and I'd invite them to the potlucks. And I remember this one time, not one time, but the worship leader for the church I was aligned with at the time went on like a 4-week vacation, and they put me in charge of the Sunday morning worship team for a month. And I might lose a few people in the audience, but just bear with me. It's a quick story. These 4 worship services, I told the team, like, I really just want us to, like, invite the Holy Spirit back into the church and let it just be free-flowing and let God do like what he wants to do. And I feel like our church has gone like stiff and rigid and we're not really doing this out of love anymore. And so if we can like break this barrier, maybe we can keep it going when the worship leader and her husband, who is also the lead pastor, get back from their vacation. And so it worked. Like every Sunday, it felt like that feeling that we described as the Holy Spirit was just like in the room, and people in the congregation were singing louder than normal. People were crying and raising their hands, and it was just like it was awesome. So then the pastor and his wife, the worship leader, get back, and a collection of people had gone to them, and they were like, David was out of control while you guys were gone. Like, they did stuff that was blasphemy, and it wasn't right, and it was bad. And of course, like in most situations in life, typically the only people who are speaking up are the people who are complaining. The people who like experience something powerful, they weren't going to them and giving them the opposite report of like, oh my God, you guys, like the worship team really tapped into something while you guys were out of town.
Yeah.
And whatever it was, like let them keep doing their thing. No one was saying that. So I remember the pastor and his wife called me into the office and basically told me like I was kicked off the worship team. Any responsibilities I had with the church were like stripped away. I maybe would be allowed back on the team in I think it was like 3 months or 6 months if I behaved, or whatever word they used. And that for me was why I ended up, when I really started questioning things, because it was like, how could we have such a good thing happen? And then because we have this group of people who were either intimidated by it or scared by it because their shit may be put on display now. I think that was sort of my theory at the time, was like they're complaining because they know they're coming into this building with sin in their heart and they don't want that sin exposed. So they got to shut down this good thing that's happening
It
as
stopped
quick
being
as
a
they
safe
can.
place for them.
So,
it was alive.
No, you're right. So that was part of the reason I left that church specifically, but then over the next 3 to 4 years ended up really walking away from Christianity as a whole. That was why. To give you some context about this dude here.
Well, I wasn't planning to get into such like an emotional contemplative space myself tonight, but man, it's just what makes me cry, that story.
Why?
One, because like the church, as whatever the hell the church is like still deeply embedded in me, right? And two, like I've been through experiences of that myself, but you did a beautiful thing. You had a beautiful experience. You found life and you allowed that to like flow and channel through you, and you were shut down, and like penalized for it, punished for it. It's profoundly sad. Also, will not say I'm sorry that you went through it. Like, it's not fair that you did, but that's an important part of your story.
Mm-hmm.
And, like to some degree, whatever medicine you carry for the world is a medicine, a type of service you carry because you went through the like injustice of that. And saw the way something, in theory, purportedly built around beauty could take beauty and stamp on it or stomp on it. Yeah, I mean, it's like God is in the church. God is in Christianity. It's just that God is also everywhere.
Right.
And I don't know if we want to get into a conversation about what the nature of God, really, but maybe not entirely hypothetical. But, it's like God is force. God is source. It's like the creative energy running through everything. Like, we are energetic beings and creatures. Energy flows up and down the synapses in our body. Emotions are actually energy in our body. Energy runs through plants' roots, and it runs through all time, space. Like, that is energy, and like that is God as well.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So let's say we have someone, not even let's say, I believe that there will be people who will listen to this episode and they will be around, that 16 to 24-year-old range.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that they're in the sort of earlier stages of where you and I were at. They hadn't had the event that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
They are not quite you when you were 21. They're a little bit before that.
Yeah.
And you got to sat down with you get to talk with
Mm-hmm.
them. What I don't want to say like what advice you would give them, because I don't like that word in this context,
Mm-hmm.
but like if they're sort of questioning, like, I do think God is real and I do think aspects of the Bible are real,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe I'm not sold on like Christianity.
Yeah.
What do you think your message to that portion of the audience would be?
Yeah. One, like, of course it's real. Like, the Bible is there. The Bible is history. There's like great power in the story of Jesus Christ and in everything that holds, like the coding, the symbolism, the stamp it has put upon this earth for 2,000 years now. All that means, I think I would just tell them that Jesus Christ is not the church. God is not the church. And knowing God is not about belief in the end. Knowing God is about experience, singularly and purely. The notion that one has to believe certain things or look a certain way or call yourself a certain thing in order to touch the source of all, the force that we call physics or biology or DNA or a million other things, like, it's about experiencing it. And you can experience it. And that's what my invitation would always be in the end, is like, it can be fun to talk about God occasionally. I don't know if it's actually fun to talk about God. But what's pretty fucking cool is learning how to experience God and coming to understand what the silent voice within is, and coming to understand that when you learn to connect to the spark of the divine, to the silent voice within, to the deepest aspects of yourself, that is what then allows you to connect to everything else and start to have what is like a profoundly cosmic experience of life. I think that's true for a 16-year-old or a 66-year-old and just about anyone in between.
Yeah.
If you're older than 66, though, you're done.
You're probably pretty set in
Yeah.
your ways. Yeah.
Probably. Not always. I get surprised sometimes.
Well, let's keep going with your story then, because not because I'm changing the topics, because I want to go. I think what happens is if we keep going down this road, we'll eventually get to how you experienced God differently later in life. you graduated high school. We have this thing in America where now you have to make this big decision of what are you going to do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
When you first graduated, did you know that you wanted to go into sociology and eventually politics, or to the best of your recollection, what was going on in your head at the time as far as what do I do with my life?
I mean, I was mostly just euphorically happy to be getting away from home. Like that,
Yeah.
the best moment of my life is when I was left alone on my college campus for the first time, actually alone, away from my family. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew I peed my pants in kindergarten or all of the things that happened in the interim. I was just me exactly as I was in that moment.
Yeah.
Best feeling I've ever had. I may never have a better feeling than that. Sorry, wife, who I recently married, but like it is what it is.
What campus or what college did you go to?
So I went to a school called George Fox. So also while I was describing my journey through college, like I was at was a Quaker school, but it was an evangelical Quaker school, which in this case really means it's a Southern Baptist school in Oregon. But I was student body president. I was director of Christian services, which is like off-campus outreach. So I was on this exploration, but I had the petri dish of my university that I was like ripping shit up in. And just causing a lot of trouble and having a great time. And it was like theological trouble sort of thing. Like, so college was a lot of fun in that case, but I didn't intend to study sociology. I just arrived there my first day and I was talking to, I guess, an advisor, and I was like, I want a psychology degree so I can study how groups of people act. And they were like, have you heard of sociology? I was like, no. They were like, sociology is the study of how groups of people act. I was like, okay, cool. I'll do that. And that was
There you go.
about the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does one go from being a sociology major in Oregon to staffing for Obama's campaign in D.C.?
You know, there's the long story, but like the short version is I walked away from Jesus and something had to replace that. And there was Barack Obama. And there's a much longer explanation of that in a whole variety of ways. But like, you know, like Barack Obama was my political Jesus. And not for long. Because it's like got on his campaign in 2008, which is one of the best and the most meaningful and the coolest experiences of my life, but also quickly realized that, you know, I was not working for a transcendent spiritual figure. I was working through an extremely talented and brilliant politician who had met his moment in exactly the right way.
I remembered, I forget who said this, and I wish I could tell you, but back in, don't reach across and slap me for saying this. Did Trump win in 2016?
He did.
Yes, because Biden's 2020, we're in 20.
Exactly.
All right, there we go. I had to work backwards through that.
Look, we all disassociate. It's fine.
Right. I remember someone in 2017, some podcast or something, but they were talking, and one of the two people was like, oh my God, I can't believe Trump won. And then the other person was like, why can you not believe that? He marketed better than his opponent. I was like, that is a very interesting perspective of just like, who is marketing this campaign better right now, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyways, what year did you graduate? Do you remember?
I graduated college?
Yeah.
I'm not that old, man. Yeah, I graduated college in 2007.
Well, I was more to give the audience, since we gave them the quick version, like how quickly from college to working on Obama's campaign.
Yeah.
It was only a couple months. So you got up to D.C. pretty quick.
Yeah, well, you know, I didn't get to D.C. until 2009. So I was in the States in the campaign. And the like real short version of how I got on the campaign is that I went to Montana and fly fish for a few months after college, and then I hopped a bus in Juarez, Mexico, and started south and ended up in Guatemala, where I stayed for several months. Still obsessed with Barack Obama, by the way. Like I was following the campaign very closely, and so I was in Guatemala, and he won the Iowa caucus in early 2008. In my little like 22-year-old pea brain, it's like, he won the Iowa caucus, he has the momentum, he's going to be president, like all of the racial sins of our past will be absolved. And then, like a week later, he loses the New Hampshire primary. And in my 22-year-old pea brain, it's like, the world is ending. Everything is falling apart. And I was in a city called Quetzaltenango. And so I remember walking around Quetzaltenango that night with, again, you would buy cigarettes one at a time from like dudes off the street selling them. This is 2 smoking references tonight. I'm not looking good. But I was walking around smoking cigarettes, moping in Quetzaltenango, and I just had this realization. I was like, he lost. But I was like, there's a lot of primary states left. I was like, I can go be involved. And, I'd gotten a little political in college. I was student body president, like had been campaigning, had been thinking about him a lot. And so like as soon as I was like, it's not over, I can be part of this. It was like amazing. So I was on Skype the next morning, just kind of cold calling any number I could find associated with the campaign. And I ended up talking with this woman named Jillian I thought she was a woman. Turned out she was my age, also a kid. But talked with Jillian Bergeron in Charleston, South Carolina. And she's like, oh, you're in Guatemala? Yeah, just show up. You can volunteer. We'll house you with somebody. We'll make sure you're staying with someone who has a car. Like, you'll just go out and volunteer. And I was like, sweet, I'll be there in 2 days. And I bought a ticket out of Mexico City to Charleston and hopped a bus that day to go north to Mexico City and started volunteering on the campaign. It turned into a job.
What were if you're allowed to say this,
Yeah.
what were the highs of campaigning that was like everything you expected and more?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side, was there any lows to helping with those 2 campaigns?
Like the best part of 2008, the best part of the entire process was, for me, it was the primaries. And I worked in the South. So I started in Charleston as a volunteer. I kind of like started being the equivalent of staff in the next state. So I worked Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, and North Carolina primaries. And in all of those, I had rural turf, which means the precincts I was organizing in were not in a city. I had precincts that were out in the country. Barack Obama voters in the South were Black Americans. And so I was a 22-year-old out in like rural Black communities as the only campaign representative within 100 miles most of the time, which means that I basically got to be the bridge between all of these people and Barack Obama. And there was incredible energy and support and jubilation and meaning tied up in his candidacy for so many people. And getting to like have that energy flow through me basically was so special, like so undeserved, really life-changing in a lot of ways. And within that, spend a day or 2 a week at Black churches and so like talk on behalf of the campaign. And yes, that does raise some good questions about separation of church and state, but also like I was raised to go stand in front of a Black church and talk about Barack Obama and Jesus. And I hammed it up, and I had so much fun. And those were really good times as well.
Look at you cheesing right now as you tell this
Dude,
story.
it was cool.
What do you remember what your reaction was when you found out he won?
Just profound relief. I'd been on the campaign for 10 months at that point, and you work 80 or 100-hour weeks, and you have no off days, and you have daily goals and stress and pressure, and I was just so tired by the end.
So all that pressure that you just described, could that be like the not so great side, or was it almost like an adrenaline rush? Like, we have this mission, we're running towards it, the 7 days a week doesn't matter, the hours doesn't matter, like we have to get this thing done by election day.
It's that elections are a glitch in the matrix. You don't just win or lose in most of life. And just winning or losing brings this clarity, and it brings an end date. So it felt pretty good for the most part.
Right.
I do think campaigns have a culture problem overall in terms of how hard folks work and how seriously they take themselves and how much stress they demand or accept or place on other people within campaigns and moments. But it felt pretty good. And I was jubilant, but I was also I was so tired, and I'd been doing it for so long, and I'd been running on fumes for months. And so you just got to the end. It was just like, okay. But also by then, early on in the campaign, I was like, if we elect Barack Obama president, like, it's going to change the course of history. Like, everything's going to be different. And really, by the end of the campaign, I did not feel that way anymore. I was really excited about Barack Obama as president, but I had learned enough about how politics in this country works, and I'd started to learn enough about how our political systems work. It was like, oh, this is like a man, and I'm really glad this man is going to be president. But there are a lot of forces at play that I really don't understand yet, but I can like feel them and like kind of start to see them. And yeah, I'm so excited. I ended up in DC not long later.
You know, there's I've ran across some accounts on Instagram where the I don't want to call anyone out. I don't even know their names anyways, but let's just say, you know, the David, the guy running it, whoever it is almost like bragging about how hard they work. You know, it's the same in the accounting industry. There's these 4 firms that just squash all the other ones, and people there have like they're very cocky. Let me just call it what it is, right? Because they're like, oh, I work for the big 4, and we work 110-hour
like
weeks.
KPMG?
Yeah, you know about. I'm sorry you know the names of these companies.
That's one of the big 4.
That's one of them. There's Deloitte, EY, and
my brother
PwC.
worked for Deloitte for years.
So even though, like you just said, you know, maybe it's not the most healthy thing, being that you were young and he won, did you notice like your ego sort of go like this a little bit as being part of that?
You know, I like had plenty of ego. I don't think I was under any illusions that I had gotten that done. Like,
because of me, Barack Obama won the presidency.
There were so many of us. It's like, you know, if it had been a situation where the election tilted on, I was in Colorado for the general election. Like, if the election had tilted on Colorado and it turned out that somehow there was like, you know, we had slightly exceeded our vote goal in North Denver where my turf was at in the general election, then maybe I could have been like, yeah, I organized that. Knocked on a lot of doors. But it did feel good to win. And what I did think is I'd been planning to go into Peace Corps, and that was part of the reason I ended up in Guatemala. Like, I had this whole theory of learning Spanish before I got into Peace Corps to learn Arabic, which I still only speak poor English. But I was like still thinking of going to Peace Corps, but after the campaign, I was like, you know, this is a pretty good win. It looks good on the resume. Like, I can just go to DC now and get a job in a development organization, because I knew I wanted to work in foreign policy at that point in my life. And so, like, that is how I ended up going to DC. Yeah. It's like, maybe not cockiness, but like, definitely recognize there is an opportunity to capitalize on.
Did you ever watch House of Cards?
I just watched the first couple episodes. I hated it.
So I've heard, like, the last thing a chef is going to do is go home and watch a cooking show. The last thing a horse trainer is going to do is go home and watch Yellowstone. Was it sort of like that for you? Like, why am I watching a show about politics when this is what I'm living and breathing 40 hours a week?
It was that, and I just found it. I mean, I have a lot of friends in DC who loved House of Cards, so this is not a universal take. I still lived there when it came out. I just found it ridiculous. Like, I was just like, this is so over the top, so dumb. Like, I don't have time for this shit.
So you sort of just answered my next question with that statement. But I love that show. Yeah. I probably watched it 4 times. I love the characters. I find it's prime entertainment. I would say probably one of my top 3 favorite shows of all times.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you was there any part of it that's reality, or is it just so exaggerated to turn it into entertainment? It's not even like sort of in line with what happens in Washington.
It's like, truly, I only watched 2 episodes, like, or 3. I don't remember. Maybe I watched 5. I don't know. But whenever in the first season he like pushed whoever it was in front of the train.
Well, obviously, I hope that part's fictional. Yeah, but our senators are just shoving people.
Yeah, but I was just like, oh man, I was like, I can't handle this right now.
The fact you saw that episode specifically, no wonder you turned it off.
But I'll tell you this: the political show or movie that has gotten closest to capturing like what it felt like being in DC and watching things happen around me, and how individuals reacted in these situations is Veep. Like, the average emotional intelligence, the average degree one's ego is, or in this case often is not under control. The average like awareness you really have of the bigger world going on around you is like no different at the highest levels of power in Washington, D.C. than it is at the school you grew up in, at the office that you work in, or any other institution that you are around. Like, there are a reason folks end up in those powerful situations. There are ways that they work with energy, their sight is bigger, their ambition is bigger, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes down to it, it is just ego and insecurity driven people doing their best to either fulfill their responsibility or maximize their own opportunity. And so I thought Veep was brilliant.
I have to check that one out. I haven't even heard of it.
Oh man, it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus, like Elaine from Seinfeld.
That's so funny you bring her up. Me and a friend were just talking about Julia last night. It's ironic.
Veep is really funny. It's also over the top. It's also exaggerated.
Perfect.
But
so here's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
You're gonna come back on the show in a year.
Okay.
And I'm gonna give you that year to watch all of House of Cards, all 6 seasons, because I know you have nothing better to do with your time than grant this request to me. And you're gonna come back on so we can do a parallels to House of Card and DC. This is a joke.
Well, I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to reject the premise of that question. I would watch several episodes of House of Cards together even, and also watch several episodes of Veep, and then if we wanted to have maybe a comparative conversation at that point.
You know what? That's a better proposal. Maybe we can get together, do 1 episode of each, and then chat.
Yeah, we're honestly, you're just going to binge Veep within the next month at this point.
I probably will. Yeah.
The seed is planted.
Back to the serious questions though. One that you put on the form I asked you to fill out that I really liked, that I've never thought about before. How would you define what politics is?
Oh, politics is just how we make collective decisions.
All right, moving on.
That's it. But like, it's like nobody gets to opt out of politics. It's like we're all involved in politics in a million ways.
Right.
Opting out of politics is your own commentary and choices about politics in the end. So it's like, get pissed that our political systems don't work and that we've institutionalized corruption in such a horrifying and overwhelming number of ways that it leaves one wanting to surrender. But politics is just how we make collective decisions. It's how we choose leaders. It's how we divvy up resources in the end. Like, as long as more than 2 people are living together somewhere, there will be politics.
The other question that I thought you jotted down that was interesting was how are politicians incentivized to act? And you sort of just said it 2 or 3 minutes ago, but how would you answer that question directly?
That's a good question. I should have been more detailed in how exactly I wrote that down just to set myself up better, but the question is good.
You did set up a follow-up question of also why is this the case?
Yeah.
If that helps you.
So in a perfect world, in any sort of like a sports psychologist is going to tell any athlete, like, you cannot be worried about failure. You cannot play not to lose. You have to focus on excellence. You will develop your craft. You will get 1 million repetitions in repeating every aspect of the skill and the craft that carries you when you are exhausted, when there is stress and pressure put on you of some sort so that you can succeed because you are seeking excellence. Politics is just built not to fail. And it is a broken component of our world and our system. And a lot of the reason that that is the case is voters' fault. We're just not paying very much attention. But no politician wins an election because of something that they did well. Politicians lose an election because they made a mistake. Or because they just looked dumb in a video. But like something went wrong and they pay the price. And so like that attitude, not seeking to lead, but seeking not to lose, winning at any cost, like that attitude pervades like most all of government structure in the end. And it incentivizes politicians not to take risks, not to iterate, not to run experiments, but just to do whatever the most cautious and least likely to fail thing is in any given setting or situation. It's like if you've worked in business, like business 101 is you can't build anything without failing. You have to fail dozens, hundreds, thousands of times. You wear failing like a badge of honor. You fail and you fail and you fail, and by failing you learn, and by learning eventually you succeed. And that's really hard in our political and our governing systems right now. And like, no wonder it pisses people off. And we can change that, but that's like changing the laws and changing how we like want to organize our institutions, which is another thing that could be within our power if we wanted to focus on it. But like mostly we'd rather watch Veep, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
This might seem like I hope this is not a dumb question, but
I hope it is.
I could get it. If it is, it'll give
Yeah.
us and you and the audience a laugh. There was something that you jotted down that made me want to ask this question. And is there does election years have any kind of impact on us, regardless of like who wins, what the outcome ends up being, just from like where you sit and what you've observed? Are they a good thing for the country? Are they? I don't know. I mean, that thought was just sort of my head about like
psychologically, they have a huge effect on us.
People get very upset.
Yeah, it's like 2/3 of our voting population is in a like black or white scenario where losing feels like catastrophe, and we're in a situation as a country right now where a lot of us have identity built in to which political party we call our own, which is not productive for a whole variety of reasons, but the biggest just being it makes an election a zero-sum game. It makes governing a zero-sum game. You either win or lose. It makes it very hard to practically go about the work of governing, of solving problems, of working on behalf of people in society. But that being said, like, who is in office does affect and impact people's lives. Both our political parties have very different values. They communicate differently. I think especially like, poor Americans are generally going to have a little bit more money in their pocket and have a little bit more flexibility if there is a democratic institution. And business owners and wealthier Americans are going to have a little bit more money in their pocket and feel a bit better about themselves if a Republican is in office. So many of the other tropes about our political parties I feel like have flipped in the last couple of years, and I'm confused by them. But, like in Love Is Not the Answer, which is a brilliantly entertaining book about love and politics, by the way, I think an argument that I'm making in the end, like one of the arguments in the books, is that, like, yes, our political parties are different. They have different values, but in the parlance I most often end up using now, like, they've both grown out of the same soil. They've grown out of the same worldview. They've grown from a same place of separation where people are separated from themselves emotionally or spiritually, where we are so often separated from each other as a community or as a nation, where we are separated from the earth. Like, nature is a resource. Labor is a resource. Like, earth is not a living thing for us to live in harmony with. People are not communities where we are, like, prioritizing their value. Instead, capital sits miles away from, like, the impact that it has through companies and through businesses and similar. Both our political parties come out of that soil. And I think that is the reason why so many people feel like it doesn't matter who wins, because their life is going to be the same. Nothing's going to change. Sometimes I don't know if analogies I make any sense.
It made sense.
But, all right, great.
No, that was good. That's
Thank
beautiful.
You. I appreciate that.
Going back to you, at some point, I think while you were in DC, before you came to Austin, maybe, I'm trying to think about where I read this. Maybe you put it on your form. Yeah, you did. At what point of your life did you realize that the system was broken and that not only did the system need help, but you needed help as well? What was sort of going on in life?
That was, I think, that is from my bio, which I did put on the form.
Yes,
I
is
thought
where
you were
I read
gonna
it.
pull out another like sucker punch picture or something.
No.
I was probably trying to be clever when I wrote that exactly that way, but part of my reasoning in leaving DC was that like one, it was very clear to me that I had lost touch with how people who did not live or work in DC or in the foreign policy establishment saw and viewed and understood and felt about the world. Like there was a number of years where I prided myself on seeing things both ways. Like if there was a headline, I knew how all of my friends and those I worked with in DC who'd been on the Obama campaign were going to feel like it. And I knew how everybody back in extremely rural and red Van, Texas was going to feel back about it. And like fast forward a number of years, like by my late 20s, been in DC about 6 years, when something would happen, I had no idea how folks at home were going to respond. And I was just this deep growing awareness that the prism through which I had been trained or was training myself to see the world was so radically different than just about everybody else's that it was really beginning to feel like a weakness. So like that was a big part of the reason that I left. Also, yes, like I looked at all of these systems and was like, they do function in a certain way. There's a reason that they're there, but like I don't like that I'm part of these anymore. Like a world that works how I want a world to work and exist and feel like is not what is here right now. But I actually didn't have a vision to replace it. I just needed to get away because I was like, I have to go learn and grow and like hopefully can have a vision of my own at some point in life. Because right now I just know it doesn't feel good. And then a third piece of this, and that's where it, for me, like the journey starts to come back together. But like I was just, this is like a little bit later. I was in Austin by now, but like I was just feeling like I was getting worse at everything in my early 30s. Like I had these areas of like immaturity or weaknesses I'd identified in myself, things I knew I just wasn't good at, ways that I would mistreat people, maybe subconsciously, maybe out of habit, often with no ill intent, especially women, that like I knew were within me that I just thought I would mature out of, that I would grow out of, that were all getting worse. Like I was often not at my best at work. Could not have a meaningful relationship that lasted. Felt like I was routinely hurting people. I didn't feel like a leader. Felt like I consumed a lot of information, wasn't creating anything. Like I had all of these things I was dissatisfied with, and I was just getting more and more frustrated because nothing was changing, and I just thought it was going to change. Because I had like done so much work in college of these certain sorts, and I thought I'd like set myself on this path, and I'd escaped all the bad things and I was doing the good things, and I was like, well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe I have to get very intentional about how I want to show up in the world and how I want to feel and who I am and what my values are. And maybe that I was so miserable as a kid and have never actually dealt with that. And maybe that I was literally raised to be in the church and to know Jesus Christ and to live in those institutions. Like maybe the fact I eventually like took a knife and cut all of that out of my life, like maybe there is some impact there that I need to go back and deal with to like become this thing that I sense I'm supposed to become, just in the end, me. Yeah, so like that started me down this other journey, and eventually like going down that journey of self led to like vision and really starting to think critically about how systems of our world work again and why they are as they are. And having a terrible time trying to like comprehend what that might mean in world life, I wrote a novel that is supposed to be funny, where a lot of weird things happen. And there's a profound amount of substantive depth as well. That was for my readers.
And my listeners.
And your listeners.
I'm going to put this one over here, actually. Then both cameras will pick it up. But you know what I thought was interesting was when you said you just needed to get out, you said the same thing about your hometown. It's almost like a theme for you.
Yeah.
For a while. It sounds like you're not there anymore. But I thought that was interesting that you felt like you were so relieved to finally be on your college campus. And then fast forward however many years it was, 8, 9, 10, 5. And here you are in the exact same boat of needing to get out of another environment where you can tell that you're not finding whatever.
Total pattern.
Yeah.
Extremely perceptive over here.
I guess it's not that crazy though. People following patterns. We all do it.
What are the odds?
Right.
But yeah, man. I used to I lived in extremes. I would find some sense of balance between extremes of various sorts. But yeah, I would just burn myself out on things, and I function in a world of have tos and need tos and trying to be's and trying not to be's. I did not function which is exhausting in the end. It's like when you are constantly holding yourself accountable to external standards or sources of values, takes a lot of work and energy, and it makes you very vulnerable to everything going on outside of you, which you can never control. And it leaves you very disconnected from self. And so, yeah, I would run out my battery trying to be so many things. And then I would have to go to the other extreme, and I would just leave, or I would just quit, and I would go recover somewhere so I could run my battery back up.
Do you feel like after you left DC and before you started working on Love Is Not the Answer, did you get the chance to experience God in a different way?
Yeah.
What did that journey look like?
So this is 5+ years ago for me now. I'd gotten to this place where I was like, maybe I'm going to have to try if I'm going to grow into some version of this thing that I can feel but can't quite see yet. Mm-hmm. Which initially led me to try and find a therapist, and there are many great therapists in the world. I did not find one of them. But in going through that process and talking with folks, it's it's maybe not a therapist so much as I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who can doesn't want to help me feel good and know what went on this week, who wants to help me recode my system, dig up all the shit from my past and go through it. And I found this 80-year-old Jewish man based in Boston named Barry. And I spent a year and a half on the phone with Barry once a week, with him just very lovingly and graciously kicking my ass in a lot of ways. But Barry taught me to feel, and he taught me that I didn't know how to feel, and all the ways I thought I was so smart was actually just a coping technique I used to intellectualize and therefore stay a million miles away from what I was actually feeling. And in introducing me to feelings, he started helping me get in touch with myself. And in that process, also started going back and touching all of these really painful parts of my past that needed to heal. And you can call that big T trauma or little t trauma or just the inevitabilities of life. But there was a lot of that. And so I had this really transformative period of time with Barry, really changed my life. And I'll just leave that at that. I can get into so much detail, but really changed my life. But the thing I couldn't get at was this God thing inside of me. And I would I would try to, I learned how to meet my feelings and embody them and let them begin teaching me about themselves, and learned all this really cool stuff you could do with yourself. And I learned how cohesive our internal environment actually is when you learn how to work with it. But I couldn't touch God, and God and shame and judgment and love and compassion were all in this electrified mass inside of me, which for me was why I first was all right, I'm going to go sit with ayahuasca, which Google it if you don't know what ayahuasca is. It's a psychedelic plant brew, for lack of a better word. And it's known for giving one really wild experiences, journeys, trips, and it's served in ceremonial, very spiritual settings. So the first 3 times I sat with ayahuasca, I was okay, ayahuasca. I was I want you to give me God back, and I want you to heal all of these wounds, and I want you to X, Y, and Z. And the first 3 times I sat with ayahuasca were extremely disappointing, because I got basically the same response each night, which was this very subtle and quiet voice coming in the midst of nights that were not at all wild or transformative or profound, telling me that you know how to meet God. You've done this before. I'm not going to do this for you. You meet God in silence. You meet God in experience. You meet God in building a daily practice that allows you to be in tune with yourself and with the quiet voice of the all that is all. And so that was extremely annoying. But after 3 nights of that, you're like, all right, fine. And so for me at that point, it was like I spent a year, like I went and got, really had to rebuy, but I got all those old books from college and dove back into the mystics and found other like spiritual teachers, but really is just part of this process of being like, all right, like what does it mean to build a daily practice where I will connect with source, force, God every single day. And that was a really cool time in the process. And I spent about a year doing that. And it was just this like it was like a soft, beautiful, slow time where there was just a lot of remembering for me. And then there was also like some crazy things happening. Like I didn't sit with ayahuasca again during that time period, but also like really started like experience God in some powerful ways in sober settings. But eventually also then went back and started sitting with ayahuasca again and did not have calm experiences anymore. Started having these like radical, profound, like truly life-altering experiences of what it meant to like love or to be love or to sit in love or to actually be in the energetic flow of unconditional love, like a force and a power that is there always at all times in us and available. And it's like I was trying to like understand these experiences that were just like so fucking good. And mixed in with this were also nights of just like extreme pain and terror where you're being taught about other things. But like, it took me this full circle back to like my early grasp of Jesus and understanding that Jesus is love and looking at the church and seeing that none of that is there. Not none of that. There is plenty of love in the church, but seeing that like institutionally and culturally in so many ways we were manipulating love and we were manipulating God for like institutional ends. And that had so infuriated me, but like I was just brought back to love and I'd have these experiences over and over again that were incredible. And then you're like, well, I can experience this when I'm like somewhere blasted off into space drinking this Amazonian brew that literally tastes like death, by the way. But then, the natural follow-up is just, well, how do I do that every day? And that like started a really beautiful inquiry for me of just like, oh, how do I facilitate these feelings that I know are possible from what I've experienced, like with these plant medicines? Like, how do I just experience that every Tuesday morning at my house? And like, it's different, but like, learn that you can do that. And I've got really into loving kindness meditation and have learned many other like visualization techniques and processes, and it works for love and it works for almost any emotion or feeling or energy, where you can like we all have like a voice that's like calling us to certain places, but you can learn to say, okay, like I really need, like, I'm gonna live a life built around love. I'm gonna live a life built around compassion. I want to live a life built around service. I need to learn how to be effectively aggressive so I can go make money. I need, like, it's the whole spectrum, but you're like, oh, I can like build these in every day and I can learn how to channel these energies and then I can live in the energy of that. And that will both like radically transform my experience every single day. But by living into those energies, I will also attract people that are aligned to that. And my external world will begin to warp itself around the shape of the internal world I'm intentionally trying to build now. So that's been like a lot of my experience the last number of years, is like re-meeting God as both the silence voice within and the everything that is all, in radical and wild and quiet and quaint and beautiful ways. But also learning that like God is energy and you can play with energy in a lot of different ways. And it will do very cool things to and with your life. I forgot the question you asked.
I believe it was what happened between. Oh, it was how you experienced God.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
I
were
kind of
bringing
answered that.
No, you did because I wanted to bring it full circle from like 40 minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah. So then, how did you to get this message out?
Mm-hmm.
You could have done a podcast. You could have, there's so many different mediums for I have something I want to tell the world.
Yeah.
Why did you decide on a book specifically?
So I spent 4 years at this startup that has done really well, for the most part. But I had in my head, like, I'd started on this journey while I was still working at the startup, and I was getting on this path, and I was, beginning to like learn all of these different things, and my experience of life was changing radically. And I was like, great, I'm going to be at this startup 2 more years till like now, roughly, probably like 2023, 2024. It'll get acquired. There'll be this influx of cash. And by then, I'm going to have my life in order. I'm going to be clear on what I'm going to do next. I'm going to have financial flexibility and freedom, and I'm going to be off like a rocket ship. So anyways, like, long story short, it's 2021 spring, and I'd been in something of a I'd been at the company 4 years. The CEO and I had not always gotten along. I had at times either it was like running or co-running like sales during that time. Like, a variety of things came to a head. I made some mistakes. I think others made mistakes, but I got fired. And so all of a sudden I'm like popped out into life, not 2 years later when I figured everything out, but right now when I'm like still in the heart of this journey. So I get fired, and it's like, well, shit. What do I want to do right now? And, took some time to sit with that, and I prayed about it, and I listened, and I inquired. And out of that process, what I came away with was that I needed to write a book, which was not the plan going in. It was really like, how am I going to leverage this experience effectively to get the next job, or am I going to start another company? And instead it's like, write a novel. And I like panicked. I was like, that's so dumb. I'm not a writer. And then I was like, wow, I'm really scared of this. I was like, maybe I run towards that fear. And that's what I chose to do in the end. And this isn't actually the book I started out trying to write. I spent 1.5 years working on a different book that was called Day Tripping in the Apocalyptic Haze of the Modern Gilded Age. Really fun if that ever gets finished. But I eventually was looking at it as 400 pages long, and I was like, this is 400 pages of not a book. This is a lot of writing. I was like, well, I guess this is practice. And so I kind of put that on the digital shelf and spent a few months waiting and listening. And I eventually came out of that process with the story that became Love Is Not the Answer. A brilliant book everybody should go buy right now.
On Amazon.
On Amazon, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Support Scott.
Thank you, friends.
By the time everyone who just bought the book is done reading it, what impact do you hope it has on them?
I hope that they see the world differently. They have a clear sense of why things are as they are and why they feel so broken. I hope that they see that despite this brokenness, systems and otherwise, there are good people everywhere. I hope that they are questioning themselves and their assumptions. And more than anything else, I hope they find a level of hope and inspiration and joy and pleasure and giggles in this. Because I wrote about serious subjects, but that's the energy that I have worked really hard to bring to this book and bring to the writing of it. And it's fiction. It's a novel. So I can't really tell you what happens all that much.
No,
but there is a psychedelic Jesus eventually.
If I'm halfway through, have I met the psychedelic Jesus yet?
Absolutely not.
I was going to say, I have a feeling like I don't think I have, but I was like, maybe the person, I don't even want to say because I don't want to give out any spoilers. And
Yeah.
not spoilers, but I don't want to give any indication as to what is happening midway through the book. So
There's an elderly beekeeper, psilocybin serving veteran who's a protege of the beekeeper. There's some presidential candidates, angry influencers. And there is eventually a psychedelic Jesus, but it may or may not be any of those folks.
okay,
It's also a megachurch pastor who is,
he's wild.
yeah. It was interesting. So I wrote, there's the megachurch pastor, and then also the Republican campaign manager is one of the primary characters.
Is that Luke?
That's Luke.
Yeah.
And I had to work really hard to write those characters compassionately. And I think I managed to do so in the end. But I rewrote those characters in those parts of the book a lot of times. And like a draft or a couple drafts in, I had to like sit down with myself at one point. And I was just like, you have not, like, the energy you bring to writing about them and telling their story in this book is the wrong energy. So I had to like really take a step back and go do like a little bit of healing work, a little bit of mental reconfiguration or emotional reconfiguration to write them correctly. Also, Luke is me. If I had just stayed as exactly what I was destined to become at 18. If that makes sense.
Were you writing too personally? Is that what you meant when you said you had to write them with more compassion? And
No, I was being mean to them. Like, I was not
so you were being
writing
mean to yourself.
to that version of myself, certainly. To the church, to Christians.
To an old version of
There
you.
was an edge to an old version of me and the existing version of so many people who I don't want to demonize now either. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to ask you maybe a somewhat obvious question, but it's just as fair of a question as when people ask me what I want to see happen with the podcast. What would you like to see happen with this book?
Perfect world. It's less about numbers sold, but the book makes an impact.
Mm-hmm.
That there are people who are challenged and who through that process come to see themselves and or our country in a different way and or are inspired to start asking different questions, going different places, channeling different energies as they create their own life experience. And if that is the definition of success, like, it has been successful because like I have like 14 fans now scattered across this country. And I've had beautiful emails and calls with people, and I've had organizations doing book clubs with it, and a lot of really cool things have happened. But I would like to sell 50,000 more copies of it, which would be about 50 times how many copies have sold right now. And I would love for it to be made into a movie, and I'd love for this book to create a platform that allows me and my voice and my story and my message to be part of something bigger. It already is part of something much bigger. I certainly would love for my platform to expand as well. And that is just a question of impact in the end.
Knowing what I know about this book, that would be amazing if it got turned into a movie.
It would be a great movie.
Some of those scenes, my goodness, would be so entertaining.
I think it's going to get made into a movie. It's something I've certainly hasn't happened yet, but there have been studios have inquired about it. I don't know how they ended up with the book exactly. There's just been soft inquiries. Nothing more has come of it than that. But it's like, it's like, this is going to get made into a movie. It's going to get made into the movie by the right people who understand the energy of the book, and who want to have a lot of fun with some very serious and touchy subjects. And at some point between 2025 and 2028, it's going to be right on time in round 2 of its existence.
Yeah. I like what you said about how you know who some of your fans are. I will just pause here to say that I know people are listening to this podcast, and some of them are my friends, and
Yeah.
some of them have been past guests, so I know who they are. I don't know who like the fans are. And so if there's anyone that's listening to this episode in particular and you would ever like to chat, I would love to meet you. So email me at sitbackWithDavid@yahoo.com, or you can look at the podcast on Instagram because there's DMs there. So David's Saturday Night Sitback. Saturday is not spelled out. It's David's Sat Night Sitback. Shoot me a message. I'd love to talk with some of you
Most
guys.
of my fans are women over the age of 55, and so for all of y'all, DM is a direct message, and it's one of the ways you can get in touch with David, who, by the way, is an incredible interviewer.
Thank you. You're
This
an
has been
incredible
great,
guest.
man. Yeah, really fun.
Thank you for being here too, by the way. I'm
Yeah.
really grateful you took the time to do this tonight.
Yeah.
It's funny you said that. One of my friends is in a band that's pretty serious. Like a lot of people don't know of them yet, but they're also not like a garage band. They're in that middle of
Yeah.
reaching some sort of tipping point. And I was going to one of their shows, and they mentioned they were like, just so you know, you're probably going to be like the only dude under 50 in the audience. And sure enough, it's all like these older women, which sort of makes sense because they're a group of guys between like 24 and 30 and all very handsome. And of course, a bunch of guys aren't showing up to this.
And they make like really emotionally in touch music.
How do you know that?
I'm very perceptive.
It's very emotionally in touch music. Yeah. Oh, they're right here. If you
Yeah.
want to know what they look like, there they are.
Yeah, I'm into them. Yeah.
Shout out The Broken View. Give them a listen.
Broken.
The Broken View.
The broken
The
view.
Broken View. We're going to switch gears here a little bit.
All right.
Do you need to take a bathroom break or anything?
Man, I'm doing great. I am just amazed. Like, let me just pull my pants down. But yeah, if you have people who listen to this many hours of you talking, you are building a real thing.
But I'm not
It's
doing any
impressive.
talking. You are.
Well, then nobody's here because
Yeah, I don't know who they are, but people are listening.
all right.
All right, couple more topics for you. How are you
All right.
doing?
I'm good.
Good,
Hydrated enough.
good. Yeah, there's more. Those are for you if you need them.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
What a guy.
I try.
Yeah.
It's all straight vodka.
Hell yeah.
So I have a two-part question for you. You mentioned that what is the root of every crisis that we are facing as a nation? You jotted some notes down about healthy masculinity, and I have been approached by a couple of teens at my gym who have told me that they have had suicidal thoughts, or maybe even put a plan into action.
Yeah.
That got me curious, and so I looked up in 2021, according to the CDC, how many teens. The age range is actually as young as 10 to as old as 24. And in 2021, 7,100 teens took their own life in the United States. This
Yeah.
is not a worldwide statistic. Had you heard this stat before?
I probably have read it. I don't remember numbers. I remember the feelings I have around facts.
It makes me want to cry.
I
It's much too high of a number. Like these 10 to 24s.
it's
These people are so young.
stunning.
There's another 6,500 in 2022. We don't have 2023 numbers yet, but this crisis has been top of mind now for me for several months. And I'm really curious to hear what you feel the root of every crisis is within the nation and or specifically the one that I have presented to you tonight.
Yeah, so our conversation at this point tees this up well. But, for me, the root of our political crisis, economic crises, environmental crises, mental health crises, whether you're talking about adult or kids or teenagers, you're not a kid, and on, it's a crisis of separation, a spiritual crisis, not a religious crisis, but a spiritual crisis. And that is like an energetic separation that we have from so much of the reality of what it means to be a human and how we as humans were designed to have a human experience. And I think I mentioned a little bit of this in a different context earlier, but we are separated from ourselves, especially as men. We are not trained to have any relationship with our emotions. We are not taught what our emotions actually tell us about how we are experiencing the world. We are not taught that our emotions, that our pain and our trauma is a source of power. We are taught that you ignore it, that you put it in the box in the attic of your psyche, that you don't touch it, that you are weak if you do this, if you're a man. Women get less of this and have a different sort of challenge with emotions, but it is still there. Spirit is energy. We were talking about this early. Like, we are, as a country, as a society, as like Western civilization, like we don't spend time connecting to the soft whisper of the energetic flows of the world that we live in. That can come across as intuition, that can come across as connecting to God in prayer, et cetera, et cetera. We are separated from self. We are separated from each other. We don't go to church anymore. We have lost so much of like core connective community. We don't live in nuclear families. So many folks don't have tight, close-knit friend groups. And in an age of social media, and especially for young people, when you are being left out of something or when you are not engaged, you are watching the people who are leaving you out play acting what they're doing in real time somewhere on your Instagram or your TikTok feed, all while all of you, even the ones who are out hanging out, the ones who are not separate in any given moment, are building their identity outside of themselves by connecting to likes or the likes that they're not getting, as this like constant drip, drip, drip of dopamine leaves them disconnected from community around them because they are so connected to their phone. We don't connect to nature. Like, we evolved along with nature. We are a creature on this created earth. We do not live in harmony with the sunrise and sunset. We do not live in harmony with the seasons. We don't get outside multiple times a day, let alone once a day, let alone maybe even once a week, to sit and listen to the wind in the trees or the sound of the river flowing, and to let our conception of us dissolve into the everything of the environment and just ground the stress out of us. And all of this in the end is actually like God to some degree, like as I was describing God earlier, but God is like the collective of like the energies available to us in this existence, the everything that is all. Like, we are not connected to that, and even when we do try to connect to that through most of what passes as organized religion right now, we are not, it's not happening through a version that is designed to connect us. It's happening through a version of religion that is trying to box up and anthropomorphize and explain God in a way that we can understand and control the incomprehensible and the uncontrollable. So all to say, for me, that is the root of every crisis that we are facing right now as a people. And when I say that we need to create new soil that new systems can grow out of, it is, what does a world look like where more of us are putting in the work and are spending the time and are learning what it means to live a life of connection. Like, for me, that's called like the 4 paths to one, but like one with self, one with each other, one with earth, one with God, as a like very simple but like a comprehensive approach to what it means to live a connected life. Which also means that the answer to every single one of those quote unquote crises is connection. And I think that is especially true for young people who we have largely thrown to the, algorithmic wolves and told to do their best. That's like, it's relationship, it's connection, it's learning who and what they are and disconnecting identity from a digital realm. I have not done this, but I'm trying right now, working with a couple of parents, to put together like an experimental, just like class or course for teens, like talking about a lot of this stuff. And it's for my own learning, because I don't spend that much time talking with teenagers. There's a few I know and like I get to talk to, but it's like, yeah, what do interventions look like right now to what you just described? Like, how can I like play any role in that in the end? I don't know, but I'm trying to figure that out. I've not found teenagers are extremely excited to sign up for emotional mastery courses. It may just need a different name, but that's part of the experiment too.
I have a few thoughts running through my head. One of which is, I wonder what would happen if I was to go to my gym for the next 2 weeks and poll about 50 teams for you and say, hey, if I just say emotional mastery course, your reaction is, and then collect that data for you. And
this could be an experiment, actually. We could do this together. You could just invite them to join a thing. We'll just, probably off air, maybe on air, we'll decide what that thing is. And we can craft like a couple versions of a description that you can experiment with in your gym conversations. And see if we drum up any interest, maybe.
The other thought that I had was, I have a friend who, he has sort of his podcast like this, but he went and got two lapel mics, and he got one of his buddies to be his cameraman, and he does a lot of short form interviews at bars and clubs downtown. And I've been thinking about doing something similar in the sense of taking the pod on the road, but not in the bar and the club scene. So when you were talking, another part of me was wondering, I have a pretty good relationship with the manager of the gym I go to, is asking him like, hey, I know everyone here knows me. Would it be okay if I stood outside the front door for 3 hours on a Monday night and did these 5-minute on-site interviews with
that'd be cool.
teens, and then ask them, I know a ton of them would be ecstatic, be like, I get to be on your podcast. Yeah, you do. Anyway, but then just ask them like, what is your relation? Here's how I would set it up. All right, Scott, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. Answer honestly. There's no wrong answer. And just say what comes to mind first. What's your relationship to yourself? What's your relationship to your friends, family, or people you would define are in your community? What's your relationship with God? And what's your relationship? What was the 4th one? I'm sorry. Nature. And what's your relationship with nature? And I'd be really, and granted, this would be a very, here's the statistician in me coming out from my college days. This would be a very skewed set of data because it'd be coming from a bunch of people that live in the same zip code. But I still think it would be a really interesting starting point to see what these 14 to 19-year-olds, how they would answer. Would it stump them? Would they have a very clear and concise answer? I'd be fascinated to see how they would respond.
Yeah.
I might do it.
You should do that. I'll come be your cameraman if you want.
Okay. Really?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, cool. Let me think on this and talk to the, I think they would be cool with it. I don't think they would care.
We've got time.
Yeah.
But yeah. That'd be awesome.
we got time. I just, as you were giving your solution, a part of me was also wondering, and this is a little bleak, but like, I wonder if they're listening to this, what's going through their head. If they're like, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm trying to put myself in your guys' shoes. I'm pointing at the camera. But if they're like, so this dude is telling me that I'll stop being depressed if I go touch dirt and stay off TikTok a little bit more. It's like, well, it would be a good starting point. It's not going to hurt you to be outside more and to put down your phone.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said, but I'm also just trying to
That was pretty conceptual as well. Like but the like literal answer is, and I think this is like, especially so this is the other piece of it, right? It's like teen issues as a whole. Like you mentioned the term healthy masculinity, but like men have been getting beat up a lot. A lot of it is justified, right? Like there is the patriarchy. We have lived in a world skewed towards the masculine broadly and towards men specifically for a long time. Men have taken that power and used it often in like very terrible, horrible ways. There's like a needed reckoning that we have been going through to some degree. But like as men's earning power goes down, as men are made fun of, mocked, emasculated in pop society routinely, what's not being offered is like a positive vision of what a man should become and how a man can channel like an innate masculinity, can channel their strength, can channel their power, can channel a desire to create, a desire to provide in a way that is healthy. And so like only bringing that up, but if you're just against things, that's a really miserable way to live. What's beautiful and what is powerful is being for things. Like we don't need a nation or a country without men or without masculinity. We need a nation and a country and a world with men who have a really clear sense of what it means to be what it means to be masculine, what it means to channel their strength, to be powerful, to create in this world with intent, and what it means to be compassionate, what it means to be kind, how to be completely at peace with the emotional reality of exactly who and what they are, so that they can create and provide a strong, grounded container for the woman or women in their life to work through and have the safety to express all of their emotions and their feelings. It's like healthy masculine is fucking strong. But it is strong in that it has learned how to work with like the entirety of the masculine, not necessarily the male, but like the masculine experience. And it can then go out into the world as that version of masculinity, that version of being a man. Like that is, again, like can be accomplished. That's one of the like types of work that I do is, it's like working with men, call it emotional mastery, call it a process of like recoding an emotional operating system, call it just learning what the fuck emotional mastery or what healthy masculine can be or mean. But that's real too. It's like, for me, it's like my purpose in life. It's, like the work is work with individuals to help them create a new reality in themselves that is going to echo and ripple out into all of the worlds that they touch. And then try to write or speak to do a version of the same thing at a societal level. Again, I don't know if I answered the last question that you asked.
You did.
Probably noticed how concise I am and quick and to the point.
You know what actually I've been thinking throughout this episode, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, is you're very articulate and you're a very good storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so if this
Buy the book.
If this led to more like public speaking stuff, I think you could deliver very well. Because I'm sure there's some authors where they're probably like great at putting stuff down on paper, but then if you put them in front of a mic or a crowd, they just like shut down. You're not like that at all. You're doing fantastic. To bring it back though, is one thing that you said is, are you creating with intent? Mm-hmm. And I love that phrase specifically because I was talking earlier about how I feel like my life has been more aligned with since I've started the podcast. Yeah. And the intention is that the theme behind the theme that's not typed anywhere, that you can't find, that only gets live here in the studio, is that I want this podcast to be a candle in the darkness. That if we were to turn off all these lights, and that's part of the reason this candle is here, is because it's part of it smells good, sure, and it looks good on camera, and it makes it feel a little bit more homey. But the idea is that if we turn off all these lights, and this candle is still lit, that someone who tunes into this podcast is potentially at the worst phase of their depression, their anxiety, of harming themselves, of having suicidal thoughts, and that the stories of Scott and all the other guests on here bring just enough light that it's not complete darkness, that they now have a candle to run with to give them some hope. And so that is what I'm creating with intent. And so for anyone listening, like you said, it doesn't have to be a teenager. It could be anyone from 16 to 66. I wonder if that's a question that you would ask yourself is, when was the last time I created with intent? I've posted a lot of selfies on Instagram, or maybe if you're more my age, you've realized that since you've graduated from college, you've had your 8 to 5 job, and you wake up and you go to this job and you collect a paycheck, and then you go home and you go to sleep, and you feel like your life has just become the cyclical thing, and you're wondering, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing for the next 30 years until I retire at 65? Maybe that's the call to action we made tonight, is when was the last time you created with intent? And for you, what does it look like? Is it on a guitar? Is it in a book? Is it starting a podcast? What's that thing that you've always thought, I should try that, and for some reason you've been too afraid to go try it?
Yeah.
Create with intent.
Love that.
I like that. The people can maybe wrap their head around that one.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Like, dude, when you just start to create with intent, when you get clear on purpose and priorities and you go for it, it like brings up all the obstacles that are in the way in your life. If you're willing to, like, honestly, if you have the courage and the strength and the power to start facing those obstacles and working on them, it is so powerful. Like the path to healing in the end is the path of creation. It's the path of focus. So it's like a lot of journey, like talk around healing journeys. So important. Healing has been an enormous part of my life. But like the goal isn't to heal in the end, actually. The goal is to be on the other side of that, clear who you are, grounded in self, creating with intent. So it's like, all right, like, what's the vision? How do I get there? And then whatever comes up as an obstacle in the way, like start knocking those down.
Yeah.
Healing, growing, working, etc.
I do have a few more questions for you, but they're sort of closing questions.
All right.
Before we move into that phase, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about tonight that we haven't brought up yet? I know we could go for 2 more hours, but
I've said so many words tonight. I was trying to remember something that we talked about earlier, and then I started thinking it actually happened yesterday, and then I realized it was definitely tonight. So, no closing words.
no closing words.
No
Okay.
closing words. Just thank you for having me, man. This
Yeah,
has been
dude.
a blast. This
Did
has
you have
been
fun?
really fun. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Those are my closing words.
I'll take them. Those are good
Amazing.
closing words.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't tell the future, but with where you sit now, where do you sort of see life going over the next few years? Is it sort of what we talked about when I asked you where you'd like to see the book go, or is there something in addition to that?
My life purpose is creating the new soil. The new soil that new institutions, that a new version of human existence that is based on connection can grow out of. That will look like writing more books. That I think will look like continuing to have my practice, like emotional mastery for and with men. That will, I trust, look like more speaking opportunities, more teaching opportunities. And I really hope and expect and pray that looks like creating babies like a couple years from now and then raising them. I hear that's fun.
I've heard mixed reviews.
Yeah,
No, I'm
absolutely.
sure it's fun. It's all fun. It's all fun.
Well,
Every aspect of it.
It's also all consuming from what I hear.
Yes.
They don't go away.
It's not like the thing I love about Thad is that if he's bugging me, I can just throw him in his crate and lock the door. Or, I can just leave some food and water out and leave for a couple hours. Like, here's some of these things you can't do with kids. You can't just leave your baby with some food and water.
No, but here's what kids do. They grow up. You don't have to leave them locked up after a few years because they can go places and they can talk.
Whereas Thad is never going to grow up. Well, I mean, he's aging.
He will
but
age.
He will be dependent on me in some way,
He
shape,
will
or
still be a
form
dog.
forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But unconditional love providing machine.
Yeah, he is.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except on days like today when it was raining for our walk and he was walking slower than normal. I'm like, why are you slowing down the pace? We're soaked.
He's probably just excited it was so cool out.
But honestly, he may have just been enjoying it.
Yeah.
God, it actually feels good to be on this walk.
Right?
Yeah. Scott Mackey, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. For the audience, I have a new tradition on this podcast. I'm not going to do it tonight if you've been listening. So in 2024, I've been asking questions that I've stolen from other podcasts that I really like and then asking them on my guests. The reason I'm not going to close out with this tradition tonight, even though we've been doing it all year, is because I've already asked you like 8 of them sprinkled throughout this episode. So I've been doing it instead of saving them for the end because they were all so topical. So we already did that. What I will say before we go is this. Go find Scott. Is the best place your Instagram, your website? Where do you want people to follow you or find out about what you're doing?
Instagram is at Scott Mackey Writer. Website is scottmackey.me. The book is called Love Is Not the Answer. Some people have read it in as little as a single airplane ride. It's a fast read if you get really into it. Also keep in mind, my most passionate fans do tend to be older, extremely bright, smart and mature women. But not exclusively. There's a lot of like 35-year-old beer drinking dudes who enjoy the book. Cool, bro.
36-year-old beer drinking dude. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Go buy the book through Amazon. If you guys stuck with us for the last 2 hours, first off, I want to give you a huge thank you for committing that much time to the show. If you liked it and you feel like this is beneficial to, I feel like we sort of touched on things that could be applicable to all of humanity tonight. So if you guys liked this discussion, please do me a huge favor, which only takes about 3 to 4 minutes of your time and is going to cost you no money at all. Go give the pod a 5-star review on Spotify. Go give the pod a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and you can leave a written review on Apple Podcasts as well. So if you want to leave me or Scott some words of encouragement, what you thought of the episode, what you think of the show as a whole, I would appreciate it. And subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're wondering why I bring this up every single episode, it is for the reason I told you earlier, that you have no idea who needs to hear Scott's story, who's in a dark place, who needs that candle in their darkness. And by you doing those 3 things, you could push this out to 10 people. And if they do it, they could push it out to 10 more. And eventually we will reach whatever soul it is that we need to reach. So please help us with this. Whew. And in the meantime, stay healthy, stay happy, and have a beautiful Saturday night. Bye, everyone.